What made my blood run cold wasn't just reading about a grandmother being humiliated at her own granddaughter's wedding with a cruel name tag. It was that I was reading it while sitting in the back corner of St. Augustine's Cathedral, staring at my own name tag that read, "The Absent Old Lady," while my granddaughter Emma walked down the aisle in a $15,000 dress that I had unknowingly paid for. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But here's what my daughter Caroline and her husband Marcus didn't know when they decided to humiliate their 70-year-old family matriarch at the most public event of the year. I wasn't just some forgotten old woman they could discard after squeezing every penny from my accounts. I was the woman who had been quietly funding their entire lifestyle for the past 3 years, including this $80,000 wedding, through a trust fund they thought was permanent inheritance. Let me tell you how I went from being treated like an unwanted wedding crasher to the one holding all the financial power that could destroy everything they'd built their reputation on. It all started 3 years ago when my daughter Caroline called me in tears from her mansion in the prestigious, historic district of Charleston, South Carolina. "Mom, we're facing complete financial ruin," she sobbed into the phone, her voice echoing off what I knew were the marble floors of their $2.3 million antebellum home. "Marcus's architectural firm is collapsing, and we're about to lose everything. The house, the cars, Emma's private school, everything we've worked for is slipping away." I had been living comfortably in my retirement community in Savannah, Georgia, Magnolia Gardens Senior Living, enjoying my weekly bridge tournaments, garden club meetings, and volunteer work cataloging historical documents at the Coastal Heritage Society. At 70, after my husband William's death 4 years prior, I thought my days of financial rescuing were behind me. William had been one of Georgia's most successful real estate developers, and he'd left me very well provided for. I had my routines, my friends, my peaceful life surrounded by Spanish moss and Southern charm. But hearing the desperation in Caroline's voice, the same voice that used to call me crying over scraped knees and high school drama, I felt my maternal instincts override my better judgment. "How bad is the situation, sweetheart?" I asked, already mentally calculating the liquid assets I could access from William's carefully structured estate. "We need $400,000 to save everything," Caroline said, her voice breaking in a way I hadn't heard since she was a teenager. "Mom, I hate having to ask you for this, but you're literally the only person who can help us. Emma would be devastated if she had to leave Pemberton Academy in her junior year. She's already been accepted to their advanced art program, and you know how much her artistic future means to her." My granddaughter Emma, brilliant, creative 17-year-old, who had inherited William's eye for design and my stubborn determination. She dreamed of studying architecture at Savannah College of Art and Design, just like her grandfather had always encouraged. I'd been living 3 hours away since William's funeral, seeing her only during major holidays and brief summer visits, always feeling guilty that I was missing so much of her teenage years. The thought of her losing her educational opportunities because of her father's business failures made my heart ache. Emma had always been the light of my life. When Caroline had struggled with infertility for years, Emma's arrival had felt like a miracle to our entire family. William used to joke that Emma had wrapped him around her little finger from the moment she was born, and he wasn't wrong. Every birthday, every school play, every art exhibition, William and I had been there, cheering louder than anyone else in the audience. After William died, I'd assumed Caroline and Marcus would want me more involved in Emma's life, not less. Instead, the opposite seemed to happen. Visits became shorter, phone calls less frequent, and I often felt like I was being politely managed rather than warmly welcomed. "Don't worry, Caroline," I told her that day, pushing aside my own concerns. "Family takes care of family. We'll figure this out." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of financial restructuring. William had left me assets worth approximately $3.2 million, but most of it was tied up in long-term investments, retirement accounts, and real estate holdings. To access the $400,000 Caroline needed immediately, I had to sell a valuable commercial property in downtown Savannah and liquidate several stock portfolios, paying substantial capital gains taxes and early withdrawal penalties that reduced my overall net worth by nearly $600,000. But I wasn't completely naive about money matters. William had spent 40 years in real estate development, and he'd taught me to always protect myself legally, especially when dealing with large sums of money. "Honey," he used to say, "the best way to ruin a family relationship is to hand over money without proper legal structure. People get funny about money, even people you love." So I called Patricia Hendricks, the estate planning attorney who had handled William's affairs for over 2 decades. Patricia was a sharp woman in her 50s, who had seen every possible family financial disaster and knew how to prevent most of them. "Eleanor," she said during our meeting in her oak-paneled office overlooking Forsyth Park, "I understand you want to help Caroline and Marcus, but $400,000 is a substantial sum. We need to structure this properly to protect everyone involved." Patricia recommended establishing a family trust that would provide Caroline with substantial monthly support while preserving the principal for Emma's education and my own long-term care needs. The trust would give Caroline $8,000 per month, nearly $100,000 annually, which should more than cover their family expenses while Marcus rebuilt his business. "This approach serves everyone's interests," Patricia explained as she drafted the documents. "Caroline gets reliable income without the pressure of managing a large lump sum. Emma's educational future is protected, and you maintain appropriate oversight to ensure the money is used responsibly." When I explained the trust structure to Caroline during our video call, her initial reaction surprised me. "Mom, this seems awfully formal and complicated," she said, her perfectly made-up face showing more irritation than gratitude. "Why can't you just transfer the money directly to our account? We're not children. We know how to manage our finances." I felt a flicker of concern at her response. If Caroline and Marcus were such capable money managers, how had they gotten into this financial crisis in the first place? But I pushed the thought aside. "Caroline, this isn't about trust. It's about legal protection," I explained patiently. "The trust structure provides tax advantages and ensures that Emma's college fund remains separate from your general expenses. It's exactly what your father would have recommended." Marcus, who had been silent during most of the conversation, finally spoke up. "Eleanor, we appreciate your caution, but we were hoping for something more straightforward. My architectural firm is getting back on its feet, and we'll be able to repay you within 18 months. A simple loan might be more appropriate." A loan. I studied my son-in-law's face on the video screen, noting the way his eyes didn't quite meet the camera. Marcus had always been charming and persuasive, but William had never fully trusted him. "That boy's got expensive tastes and champagne dreams," William used to say. "I just hope he's got the work ethic to match." "Marcus, I'm not comfortable with a loan structure for this amount," I said firmly. "The trust provides security for everyone and ensures the money is used for family stability, not speculative business ventures." I saw Caroline and Marcus exchange a quick glance before Caroline's expression shifted to resigned acceptance. "Of course, Mom. You're right, as always. The trust makes perfect sense from a legal standpoint. And honestly, having guaranteed monthly income might actually be better than a lump sum that we could potentially mismanage during stressful times." The trust was established with very specific terms. Caroline would receive $8,000 monthly for general family expenses, with the understanding that the principal would eventually fund Emma's complete education, undergraduate, graduate school, whatever she chose, and then be split between Caroline and Emma upon my death. I retained complete authority to modify, suspend, or revoke the trust at any time, though I saw no reason to emphasize this detail to Caroline and Marcus. For the first 6 months, everything seemed to work beautifully. Caroline called every Sunday afternoon, updating me on Marcus's new architectural projects, Emma's academic achievements, and their deep gratitude for my support. They sent weekly photos of family dinners at Charleston's finest restaurants, weekend trips to their little cottage on Kiowa Island, and Emma's art pieces being displayed in the school's prestigious galleries. "Mom, you literally saved our family," Caroline said during one of our regular calls. "Marcus's firm is signing major contracts again, and Emma's thriving at Pemberton. This trust fund is giving us exactly the stability we needed to get back on our feet." But then, subtle changes began that I initially attributed to busy lives and natural family evolution. The Sunday calls became every other Sunday, then monthly. When I did speak to Caroline, she seemed distracted and rushed, often cutting conversations short because she was running late for a charity board meeting or needed to get Emma to her art tutor. Emma, who used to grab the phone eagerly to tell me about her latest paintings and college dreams, was increasingly busy with AP classes or out with friends when I called. When I did speak to her, our conversations felt stilted and brief, as if she was being coached on what to say. "Is everything all right with the family?" I asked Caroline during one particularly short conversation in the spring. "You all seem so busy lately, and I feel like I'm losing touch with what's happening in your lives." "Everything's wonderful, Mom," Caroline replied quickly. "We're just incredibly busy with our social obligations here. Marcus is on 3 different boards now, Emma's got college prep and her art portfolio to manage, and I'm chairing the Historic Preservation Society's annual gala. We're grateful for the trust support, but we don't want you to feel like you need to micromanage our schedules." Micromanage their schedules? I was simply trying to maintain a loving relationship with my daughter and granddaughter. But Caroline's words stung, making me feel like an intrusive burden rather than a caring family member. When I suggested visiting for Emma's senior art exhibition in the fall, Caroline's hesitation was obvious. "Actually, Mom, that might not be the best timing. Emma's really stressed about her college applications, and having house guests would just add pressure. Maybe we could plan something for after she hears back from schools." Spring came, and with it, college acceptance letters. Emma had been accepted to several prestigious art programs, including SCAD, just as we'd all hoped. But when I called to congratulate her and discuss how we'd use her education fund, Caroline answered instead, "Oh, Mom, Emma's out celebrating with friends. She's so relieved to have gotten into her first choice school. The education fund you set up is perfect. We'll be able to cover everything without any student loans." "That's wonderful. When should we meet to discuss the logistics? I'd love to take Emma out to celebrate and talk about her college plans." "Actually, Mom, Emma's schedule is completely packed for the next few months. Graduation, senior trip, summer. Internship preparation. Maybe we could plan something for later in the summer?" Later in the summer became fall, then winter. Every time I suggested visiting or having Emma come stay with me for a few days, there was another excuse. Piano recitals, volunteer commitments, social obligations, college preparation courses. I began to feel like I was being managed rather than loved, given just enough information to keep the monthly trust payments flowing without actually being welcomed into their lives. It wasn't until I received Emma's wedding invitation 8 months later that I discovered how thoroughly I had been relegated from beloved grandmother to unwanted obligation. The invitation was elegant, cream-colored, cardstock with gold embossing, clearly expensive, but it arrived only 3 weeks before the wedding date, with a brief handwritten note from Caroline. "Mom, I know this is short notice, but Emma and James decided on a small, intimate ceremony. We hope you can make it." "Small and intimate?" I called Caroline immediately. "Caroline, I just received Emma's wedding invitation. This is the first I'm hearing about her engagement. When did this happen?" "Oh, Mom, didn't we tell you? Emma got engaged to James Whitmore last Christmas. He's from one of Charleston's oldest families. His father owns Whitmore Development. It's been such a whirlwind of planning. Last Christmas. Emma had been engaged for 8 months, and no one had bothered to tell me. Why wasn't I involved in the planning? I would have loved to help with the wedding preparations. Well, James's family has very specific traditions, and they preferred to handle most of the arrangements themselves. You know how these old Charleston families can be about their customs. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with Savannah's winter weather. Caroline, this is my granddaughter's wedding. I should have been involved from the beginning. Mom, you're being dramatic. You're invited, aren't you? The ceremony is at St. Augustine's Cathedral, and the reception is at the Ocean House. It's going to be beautiful. Beautiful and expensive, I thought. St. Augustine's Cathedral was one of Charleston's most prestigious venues, and the Ocean House was a luxury resort that charged thousands of dollars just for the privilege of holding an event there. How are you paying for all this? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Oh, family contributions and savings. James's family is helping with some costs, and we've been setting aside money from our monthly income, monthly income. The $8,000 per month that came directly from my trust fund. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my granddaughter's wedding, the most important day of her young life, was being funded by my money. But I was being treated like a distant acquaintance who merited only a last-minute invitation. The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparations. I bought a new dress, arranged for transportation to Charleston, and booked a room at a downtown hotel since no one had offered to let me stay at the family home I had helped them keep. But nothing could have prepared me for the humiliation I would experience on the actual wedding day. Arrived at St. Augustine's Cathedral an hour before the ceremony, hoping to have some time with Emma before she walked down the aisle. Instead, I was handed a name tag by a wedding coordinator I didn't recognize. "You must be Mrs. Eleanor Montgomery," the young woman said cheerfully. "Here's your seating assignment." I looked down at the name tag in my hands. In elegant script, it read, "The absent old lady." My blood turned to ice. I stared at those words, reading them again and again, hoping I was somehow mistaken. But there it was, clear as day. The absent old lady. "Excuse me," I said to the coordinator, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think there's been a mistake with my name tag." The young woman checked her list. "Eleanor Montgomery? No, that's correct. The bride's family specifically requested that designation." The bride's family. Caroline and Marcus had deliberately chosen to humiliate me in the most public way possible, in front of hundreds of Charleston's social elite, at my own granddaughter's wedding. I walked into the cathedral on unsteady legs, clutching my purse and that devastating name tag. The church was decorated magnificently, white roses and hydrangeas everywhere, silk ribbons draped along the pews, thousands of dollars worth of flowers and decorations, all paid for with money from my trust fund. My assigned seat was in the very back corner of the church, behind rows of strangers who had been given seats closer to the altar than Emma's own grandmother. I sat there in my new dress, surrounded by Charleston society members who were greeting each other warmly while I remained completely alone. That's when I pulled out my phone and started reading that support forum for grandparents who felt excluded from their families. That's when I came across the story about another grandmother who had been humiliated at her granddaughter's wedding. That's when I realized I wasn't just reading about someone else's tragedy. I was living my own. As I sat in that back corner, watching strangers file into seats that should have been reserved for family, I began to understand something that would change everything. Caroline and Marcus hadn't just been taking my money. They had been systematically erasing me from Emma's life while using my generosity to fund their social climbing. The $8,000 monthly payments hadn't been helping a struggling family get back on their feet. They had been bankrolling a lifestyle of luxury and social status that Caroline and Marcus were using to elevate their position in Charleston society. And I had been paying for my own exclusion. But what Caroline and Marcus didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have anticipated, was that the woman sitting in the back corner of that cathedral, clutching a humiliating name tag, wasn't just some forgotten old lady they could discard after using up her usefulness. It was Eleanor Montgomery, widow of one of Georgia's most successful real estate developers, trustee of a multi-million-dollar estate, and the person who controlled every single dollar that had made their current lifestyle possible. More importantly, I was a woman who had just realized that love and respect can't be bought, but they can certainly be withdrawn. As the organ music began to play and Emma started down the aisle in her beautiful dress, the dress I had unknowingly purchased, I made a decision that would change everything. It was time for Caroline and Marcus to learn what happens when you mistake generosity for weakness and confuse financial dependence with permanent control. The absent old lady was about to become very present indeed. Looking back now, I realized that the seeds of this betrayal were planted decades ago, long before Caroline ever made that tearful phone call asking for help. To understand how I ended up sitting in the back corner of my granddaughter's wedding with a humiliating name tag, you need to understand who I was before I became the absent old lady, and more importantly, who Caroline was before she became the calculating woman who would orchestrate my public humiliation. My name is Eleanor Catherine Montgomery, and I was born in 1954 in a small coastal town outside Savannah, Georgia, to parents who believed that Southern women should be strong, gracious, and fiercely protective of their families. My father, Robert, owned a successful shipping company, and my mother, Catherine, was the kind of woman who could organize a charity gala for 500 people while simultaneously managing a household and never letting anyone see her sweat. I learned early that in our family, love was demonstrated through action, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty. When someone you cared about was in trouble, you didn't hesitate. You opened your heart, your home, and if necessary, your checkbook. These weren't just values we talked about. They were principles we lived by, and they shaped every major decision I would make for the next 70 years. I met William Montgomery in 1975 at a Savannah Social Club dance when I was 21 and he was 25. William was unlike any man I had ever encountered. Tall, broad-shouldered, with intelligent dark eyes and a quiet confidence that commanded attention without demanding it. He had just graduated from Georgia Tech with a degree in civil engineering and was working for his father's small construction company. But even then, you could see the ambition burning behind his gentle demeanor. "Eleanor Catherine," he said when he asked me to dance, using my full name in a way that made it sound like poetry. "I have a feeling you and I are going to build something beautiful together." He was right, though neither of us could have imagined just how literally that would prove to be. William and I married in 1977 in a ceremony at the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist that was elegant but not ostentatious. William's family believed in success through hard work, not inherited wealth or social pretension. For our honeymoon, we drove to the mountains of North Carolina in William's pickup truck, staying in a modest cabin where we spent our days hiking and our evenings planning our future. "Eleanor," William said one night as we sat on the cabin's front porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, "I want to build developments that change people's lives, not just houses, but communities where families can thrive and grow. And I want to do it with integrity, treating every client like their family." That vision became the foundation of Montgomery Development, the company William built from a two-person operation into one of the Southeast's most respected real estate firms. But more than that, it became the foundation of our marriage. We were partners in everything: business decisions, community involvement, and the shared dream of raising children who would understand the difference between being successful and being worthy of respect. For 8 years, we tried to have children. 8 years of hope and disappointment, of medical appointments and treatments, of watching our friends celebrate pregnancies and first steps, while we wondered if we would ever hear the sound of a child's laughter in our home. There were moments when I wondered if God was punishing us for some unknown sin, or if perhaps we were meant to pour our parental love into other endeavors. but William never wavered in his faith that we would eventually become parents. "Eleanor," he would say during my darkest moments, "some of the most beautiful things in life take time to develop. Look at the live oaks in Forsyth Park. They've been growing for over a century, and they're more magnificent than any tree that shoots up quickly. Our child will be worth the wait." When Caroline finally arrived in 1985, after a complicated pregnancy that kept me on bed rest for 4 months, she was indeed worth every moment of waiting. Born with a full head of dark hair and the most alert green eyes I had ever seen, Caroline seemed to study the world around her with an intensity that suggested she was already planning how to conquer it. From her earliest months, Caroline was extraordinarily bright and determined. She spoke in complete sentences before her second birthday, reading by age 4, and showing an early aptitude for music, art, and languages that astounded her teachers. But more than her intelligence, what struck everyone who met Caroline was her charm, an almost magnetic ability to make people want to please her and gain her approval. "That child could charm the paint off a fence post," William used to say with obvious pride, though I sometimes detected a note of concern in his voice. "She's going to be able to accomplish anything she sets her mind to. I just hope she sets her mind to the right things." William and I raised Caroline with the same values that had guided our own lives: hard work, integrity, compassion for others, and the understanding that privilege comes with responsibility. We sent her to excellent schools, supported her numerous extracurricular activities, and made sure she understood that the Montgomery name carried expectations of character and community service. Caroline excelled at everything she touched. Straight A's throughout elementary and middle school, first chair violin in the youth symphony, captain of the debate team, winner of multiple academic competitions. She had friends from every social circle, but never seemed to be defined by any particular group. She was simply Caroline Montgomery, the girl who was good at everything and nice to everyone. By high school, Caroline's social intelligence had evolved into something more sophisticated. She had an uncanny ability to read people's motivations and insecurities, and she used this insight to position herself at the center of every important social group. She was elected student body president, homecoming queen, and valedictorian, not just because of her academics, but because she had cultivated the support of students, teachers, and parents with remarkable skill. Caroline has a gift for making people feel special, her high school guidance counselor told William and me during a college planning meeting. She remembers everyone's name, asks about their interests, and genuinely seems to care about their well-being. It's a rare quality in someone so young. At the time, I interpreted this as evidence that we had raised a daughter with exceptional empathy and social awareness. Looking back now, I wonder if what we were actually seeing was the early development of sophisticated manipulation skills disguised as genuine caring. Caroline chose to attend the University of Virginia, where she majored in art history with a minor in business administration, a combination that seemed to perfectly reflect her interests in culture and practical success. Her college years were a continuation of her high school achievements: Dean's List every semester, leadership positions in multiple organizations, internships at prestigious museums and galleries. It was during her junior year at UVA that Caroline met Marcus Whitfield. I still remember the phone call when she told me about him. Her voice had a breathless quality I had never heard before as she described this incredibly sophisticated architecture student who came from one of Richmond's most prominent families and had already been offered positions at several top firms before graduation. "Mom, he's different from all the college boys here," she gushed. "He's mature, he has real vision for his career, and his family has this amazing estate in the James River plantation country. You and Dad are going to absolutely love him." When Caroline brought Marcus home for Thanksgiving that year, William and I could immediately see why she was so smitten. Marcus Whitfield was undeniably impressive. tall and lean with the kind of classical good looks that suggested generations of good breeding, impeccably dressed, and possessed of the easy confidence that comes from growing up with money and social position. He spoke knowledgeably about architecture, art history, and historic preservation. He asked William thoughtful questions about sustainable development and complimented me extensively on everything from my garden to my interior decorating choices. Most importantly, he clearly adored Caroline and treated her with the kind of respect and attention every parent hopes their daughter will receive. "Your daughter is extraordinary, Mrs. Montgomery," he said, as I served dessert on our good china. "She's the most intelligent, cultured woman I've ever met. You and Mr. Montgomery have every reason to be incredibly proud." William and I exchanged pleased glances across the table. It was obvious that Marcus genuinely appreciated Caroline's accomplishments and character. But there were small details that nagged at me, even during that first visit. The way Marcus casually mentioned the cost of things, his watch, his car, the wine he had brought as a hostess gift, in ways that felt more like status signaling than natural conversation. How he seemed to expect to be served first at meals and appeared surprised when William helped clear the table. The subtle way he steered discussions toward his family's social connections and real estate holdings rather than his own academic or professional achievements. "He's very sure of himself," William observed after Marcus and Caroline had gone out for the evening. "He's been raised with privilege," I replied, though I had noticed the same thing. "That's not necessarily a character flaw, and he clearly makes Caroline happy." "He does make her happy," William agreed. "I just hope he's planning to earn his own success rather than relying on family connections and Caroline's talents." That comment proved more prescient than either of us could have imagined. Caroline and Marcus's relationship progressed rapidly throughout her senior year. By graduation, they were discussing marriage and had already begun planning their future together. Marcus had been offered a position at a prestigious Richmond architecture firm, while Caroline was considering graduate school in arts administration. But then Caroline made a decision that surprised both William and me. "I've decided to defer graduate school for a year," she announced during one of our weekly phone calls. "Marcus is starting his new job, and I want to spend some time exploring career opportunities in Richmond before I commit to a specific program." William's expression darkened. "Caroline, you've worked your entire life toward graduate school. Are you really going to put your education on hold for a boyfriend's career?" "It's not just any career, Dad. Marcus is working on some incredible historic preservation projects, and there might be opportunities for me to get involved. Plus, Richmond has amazing museums and cultural institutions where I could gain valuable experience." "And what if these opportunities don't materialize?" I asked gently. "Then I'll apply to graduate programs next year." "Mom, this isn't about abandoning my goals. It's about being flexible enough to explore different paths." William and I were concerned, but Caroline was 22 years old and had always made excellent decisions. We trusted her judgment, even when our instincts suggested caution. The deferral became 2 years, then 3. Caroline found part-time work at a Richmond art gallery, but the position was more administrative than curatorial, and the salary was barely enough to cover her expenses. Meanwhile, Marcus thrived in his new role, working on high-profile restoration projects and quickly establishing himself as one of the firm's rising stars. But what concerned me most was how Caroline seemed to be adapting her own ambitions to support Marcus's career advancement. She attended office parties and client dinners as his charming companion, used her social skills to help him network with potential clients, and gradually became more invested in his professional success than in developing her own. "I'm learning so much about the business side of architecture and preservation," she would tell me during our phone calls. "Marcus is teaching me about project management and client relations. These skills will be invaluable when I do go back to school." When Caroline called to announce their engagement 2 years later, I was genuinely happy for her, even though I privately worried that she had never developed an independent career identity. The wedding planning process revealed just how much Caroline had become absorbed into Marcus's family's social world. "We're thinking of having the ceremony at St. Paul's Episcopal in Richmond," Caroline said during one of our planning conversations. "It's where the Whitfield family has worshipped for 4 generations, and Marcus's parents feel strongly about maintaining family traditions." "What about having the wedding here in Savannah?" I suggested. "We could use the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist where your father and I were married. It would be meaningful to have the ceremony where you grew up." "Oh, Mom, that's a sweet idea. But Marcus's family has already started making preliminary arrangements in Richmond. His mother knows all the best vendors, and honestly, it will be easier to plan everything from here." The wedding, when it happened, was indeed beautiful and expensive. The Whitfields spared no expense in creating an elegant celebration at one of Richmond's most prestigious venues. But throughout the planning process and the ceremony itself, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching my daughter marry into a family rather than creating her own. After the wedding, Caroline and Marcus settled into a comfortable life in Richmond's historic fan district. Marcus continued advancing in his career, while Caroline found a position at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts that was more substantial than her previous gallery work, but still seemed secondary to her role as Marcus's wife. For the first few years of their marriage, everything seemed to be progressing well. Marcus was promoted to senior associate at his firm, Caroline was enjoying her museum work, and they were actively involved in Richmond's social and cultural scene. They bought a beautiful Tudor-style house in one of the city's most desirable neighborhoods and seemed to be building the kind of life that combined professional success with social prominence. It was during their 3rd year of marriage that Caroline called with news that would change everything. "Mom, I have something wonderful to tell you," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "I'm pregnant." The pregnancy had been difficult to achieve. Caroline and Marcus had been trying for over 2 years, and the news filled William and me with joy. We had begun to worry that we might never become grandparents, just as we had once worried we might never become parents. When Emma Caroline Whitfield was born on a snowy February morning in 1989, she was absolutely perfect. Tiny and delicate with Caroline's green eyes and Marcus's aristocratic features, Emma seemed to embody the best of both families. Holding my granddaughter for the first time, I felt a love so fierce and immediate that it took my breath away. "She's going to be extraordinary," William whispered as he cradled Emma in his arms. "Look at those eyes. She's already studying everything around her, just like her mother did." Emma was indeed extraordinary, but in ways that were both wonderful and concerning. She was an exceptionally bright child who spoke early and showed artistic talents that amazed everyone around her. But she was also sensitive and somewhat withdrawn, preferring the company of adults to other children and showing a maturity that sometimes seemed beyond her years. What concerned me most was how Caroline and Marcus seemed to view Emma more as an accessory to their social status than as a child who needed nurturing and guidance. They enrolled her in the most exclusive preschools, hired expensive tutors for music and art lessons, and dressed her in designer clothes that cost more than most people spent on their entire wardrobes. "Emma is going to have every advantage we can give her," Marcus said during one of our visits. "The Whitfield name opens doors, but she'll need the education and cultural background to walk through them successfully. But advantages, I was learning, could sometimes become burdens." Emma was expected to excel at everything she touched, to be a credit to both the Montgomery and Whitfield names, and to fulfill ambitions that seemed more focused on adult expectations than childhood happiness. When Emma was 5 years old, William had his first heart attack. It was mild, and he recovered completely, but the experience forced us to confront our own mortality and make some important decisions about our future. "Eleanor," William said during his recovery, "I want to spend more time with Emma while she's still young. I don't want to be the grandfather she barely remembers because we were too busy building wealth to build relationships." We decided to step back from active involvement in Montgomery development. transitioning to more of an advisory role while younger partners took over day-to-day operations. This change allowed us to travel more, spend extended time with Emma, and become the kind of grandparents who were genuinely involved in her life rather than just occasional visitors bearing expensive gifts. Those years, when Emma was between 5 and 10, were some of the happiest of my life. We would have her stay with us for weeks during the summer, teaching her to garden, taking her to museums and historical sites, and introducing her to the kind of simple pleasures that wealthy children often miss. Emma flourished during these visits, showing a creativity and curiosity that seemed to blossom when she was away from the pressures of her Richmond life. "Grandma Eleanor," she said one summer when she was 8, as we worked together in my garden, "why do Mom and Dad always seem worried about what other people think?" The question caught me off guard with its perceptiveness. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Like, when we go to parties, they're always telling me to stand up straight and speak clearly and make sure I don't spill anything. But when I'm here with you and Grandpa William, nobody cares if I get dirty or laugh too loud." I knelt down to Emma's level, looking into her serious green eyes. "Honey, your parents love you very much, and they want you to be successful and respected. Sometimes adults worry too much about appearances, but that doesn't mean they love you any less." "I know they love me," Emma said. "I just wish they would play with me more instead of always correcting me." That conversation stayed with me long, after Emma returned to Richmond. I began to notice that Caroline and Marcus seemed more concerned with Emma's achievements and behavior than with her emotional well-being. Every phone call included updates about Emma's academic performance, her art awards, her music recitals, but rarely any mention of whether she was happy or making friends, or simply enjoying being a child. When William died suddenly of a massive heart attack in 2019, I was devastated, but not entirely unprepared. We had always known his heart condition could worsen, and we had spent his final years making sure we had no regrets about time unspent or words unsaid. What I wasn't prepared for was how dramatically his death would change my relationship with Caroline and Marcus. During the funeral and the weeks that followed, they were appropriately supportive and caring. But as the initial crisis passed and the reality of my new situation set in, I began to notice subtle changes in how they treated me. Phone calls became less frequent and more superficial. Invitations to visit became less common and more conditional. Most concerning of all, Emma's summer visits to Savannah were gradually shortened and then eliminated entirely. "Mom, Emma's schedule is just so packed with activities and tutoring," Caroline explained when I asked about summer plans. "She's at such a crucial stage in her academic development, and Marcus and I feel like she needs more structure than she gets when she's visiting you." More structure. Translation: less time with the grandmother who encouraged her to be creative and spontaneous, rather than perfectly performing. By 2020, our relationship had settled into a pattern that I now recognize as the beginning of my systematic exclusion from Emma's life. I was kept informed about major events and achievements, but I wasn't invited to participate in the daily experiences that create genuine relationships. I became more of an audience for Emma's accomplishments than a participant in her childhood. It was into this context of growing distance and polite but superficial contact that Caroline's desperate phone call about their financial crisis arrived in 2021. Looking back, I realized that call wasn't the beginning of their manipulation. It was simply the moment when they decided to monetize the loving relationship I was trying so hard to maintain. But I couldn't see that then. All I could see was my daughter in crisis and my granddaughter potentially losing her opportunities. So I did what I had always done when someone I loved needed help. I opened my heart, my home, and my checkbook, never imagining that my generosity would be used to fund my own systematic exclusion from the family I loved more than anything in the world. As I sat in that back corner of St. Augustine's Cathedral, holding a name tag that reduced me to the absent old lady, I finally understood that Caroline and Marcus hadn't been in a financial crisis at all. They had been in a social crisis, desperate to maintain a lifestyle and status that they couldn't afford on Marcus's income alone. And they had solved that crisis by turning me into their personal ATM while systematically erasing me from Emma's life. The woman who had raised Caroline to value integrity and compassion had somehow produced a daughter who saw family relationships as transactions and elderly parents as resources to be exploited rather than people to be loved. But what Caroline didn't understand, what she couldn't possibly have anticipated, was that the woman sitting in the back of that cathedral wasn't just a heartbroken grandmother. I was Eleanor Montgomery, raised to be strong and gracious but also fiercely protective of those I loved. And I was about to show my daughter exactly what happens when you mistake generosity for weakness and confuse financial dependence with permanent control. The absent old lady was indeed about to become very present, and Caroline was going to learn that the Montgomery strength she had inherited came with Montgomery principles she had chosen to abandon. It was time for both of those lessons to begin. The transformation of my relationship with Caroline and Marcus from loving family to financial transaction didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process, so subtle and carefully orchestrated that I didn't recognize it for what it was until I was sitting in that cathedral, staring at a name tag that revealed the complete success of their strategy. Looking back, I can see that the manipulation began within weeks of William's funeral, but it was disguised so cleverly as concern for my well-being that I initially felt grateful for their attention rather than suspicious of their motives. The first sign came during a phone call in late 2019, about 6 weeks after William's death. I was still deep in grief, struggling to adjust to life without the man who had been my partner for 42 years, when Caroline called with what seemed like a caring suggestion. "Mom, Marcus and I have been talking, and we're worried about you living alone in that big house," she said, her voice filled with what sounded like genuine concern. "Have you thought about maybe moving to something smaller and more manageable?" At the time, I interpreted this as natural worry about an elderly widow living independently. The house William and I had built in Savannah's historic district was indeed large. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, with extensive gardens, and a carriage house that we had used as William's home office. It required maintenance and upkeep that I would now be managing alone. "I appreciate your concern, sweetheart, but I'm not ready to think about moving yet," I told her. "This house holds so many memories of your father. I need time to grieve before I make any major decisions." "Of course, Mom. We completely understand. It's just that Marcus knows some excellent real estate agents who specialize in helping seniors downsize when they're ready. The market is really strong right now for historic properties. Real estate agents." Even in my grief, something about the way she mentioned this struck me as oddly specific and premature. But I pushed the feeling aside, attributing it to my emotional state and Caroline's natural inclination toward practical planning. The second incident occurred a month later, during what was supposed to be a casual conversation about my holiday plans. "Mom, are you sure you want to spend Christmas alone this year?" Caroline asked. "We'd love to have you come to Richmond, but we're hosting Marcus's entire family, and the house will be completely full. Maybe you could join us for New Year's instead?" The invitation felt hollow, extended with enough qualifications to make it clear that my presence would be inconvenient rather than welcome. This was the first Christmas since William's death, and the first time in Emma's 20-year life that I wouldn't be spending the holidays with my granddaughter. "Actually, I've been invited to spend Christmas with the Hendersons," I lied, referring to family friends who had indeed extended an invitation that I had been planning to decline. "It might be good for me to be around people rather than sitting alone with memories." "Oh, that's wonderful." Caroline's relief was audible. "The Hendersons are such lovely people. I'm sure they'll take good care of you." Take good care of me. As if I were an invalid rather than a healthy 70-year-old woman who was perfectly capable of taking care of herself. After hanging up, I sat in William's study, surrounded by his books and business papers, trying to understand why that conversation had left me feeling so unsettled. Caroline's words had been appropriate, even caring, but something about the tone felt wrong, as if she were managing me rather than including me. The third incident was more direct and occurred during a visit Caroline and Marcus made to Savannah in early 2020. They had driven down for a long weekend, supposedly to help me with some of William's business affairs, but their real agenda became clear when Marcus brought up my investment portfolio during dinner. "Eleanor, I hope you don't mind me asking, but have you reviewed your financial situation since William's passing?" Marcus said as we sat in my dining room, eating off china that had been in my family for 3 generations. Estate transitions can be complicated, and sometimes widows discover that their financial picture isn't as secure as they thought. I set down my fork, studying my son-in-law's face. Marcus had never shown any interest in my financial affairs before, and his sudden concern seemed both inappropriate and presumptuous. "Marcus, I appreciate your concern, but William and I worked with excellent advisors, and everything is in order," I said carefully. "Patricia Hendricks has been handling the estate matters, and she assures me that I'm very well provided for." Of course, Marcus said quickly. "I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. It's just that the markets have been so volatile lately, and sometimes older investors don't realize how much their portfolios have been affected." Older investors. The phrase stung, even though I tried not to let it show. William had taught me about investments and financial planning from the early days of our marriage. I wasn't some helpless widow who didn't understand money. I was a woman who had been actively involved in building and managing significant wealth for decades. "Our portfolio is quite diversified," I said firmly. "And Patricia has assured me that we weathered the recent market fluctuations very well." Caroline, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Mom, Marcus is just trying to help. He's dealt with a lot of clients who've had to make difficult financial decisions after losing a spouse. We want to make sure you're protected." Protected? From what exactly? And when had my daughter and son-in-law appointed themselves as my financial guardians? The conversation moved on to other topics, but I noticed that Marcus continued to ask subtle questions about my assets throughout the weekend. How much was the house worth in the current market? Had I considered consolidating my investment accounts? Was I sure I was getting the best advice from a small-town attorney like Patricia? It was during that same visit that I overheard a conversation between Caroline and Marcus that should have set off every alarm bell I possessed. I had gone to bed early, leaving them in the living room with coffee and brandy, when I realized I had forgotten to lock the front door. As I came back downstairs, I heard their voices from the living room, not loud enough to understand individual words, but the tone was intense and urgent. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, not intending to eavesdrop, but unable to avoid overhearing fragments of their conversation. "Has to be at least 3 million, probably more," Marcus was saying, not going to just hand it over. Caroline's voice, sharp with frustration. "If something happens to her health, trust fund or power of attorney, Emma's future." I stood there in my nightgown, my hand on the banister, feeling ice form in my stomach as I realized they were discussing my assets and my potential vulnerability. They weren't visiting to help me through my grief. They were conducting reconnaissance, assessing my financial situation and planning how to gain access to it. I crept back upstairs without locking the door, my mind racing. Surely I had misunderstood. Surely my own daughter and her husband weren't plotting to exploit my widowhood for financial gain. But the words I had heard were too specific, too calculating to be dismissed as innocent concern. That night, I lay awake for hours, replaying every conversation from their visit, analyzing every suggestion and comment through a new lens. The bright questions about my house, the concerns about my investments, the implications that I needed protection. It all formed a pattern that was becoming impossible to ignore. The next morning, Caroline and Marcus were warm and affectionate as they prepared to leave, thanking me for a wonderful visit and promising to call soon. But their embraces felt different now, tinged with the kind of calculation I associated with business transactions rather than family affection. After they left, I called Patricia Hendricks and asked her to review all my legal documents to ensure that my assets were properly protected and that no one could gain access to them without my explicit consent. "Eleanor, is there something specific you're concerned about?" Patricia asked. I hesitated, not wanting to voice suspicions about my own daughter that might sound paranoid or ungrateful. "I just want to make sure that if anything happens to my health, my affairs are structured to prevent any confusion or conflicts." "That's very wise," Patricia said, "especially for someone in your financial position. There are unfortunately many cases where family members try to take advantage of elderly relatives who become vulnerable." Family members. The phrase hung in the air between us, loaded with implications that neither of us wanted to address directly. Over the following months, the pattern continued and intensified. Caroline's phone calls became more frequent but also more focused on specific topics: my health, my living situation, my financial management. She began expressing concerns about my isolation in Savannah and suggesting that I might be losing touch with practical realities. "Mom, Mrs. Peterson told me she saw you at the grocery store last week, and you seemed confused about your credit card," Caroline said during one particularly manipulative conversation. "Are you sure you're managing all your daily tasks okay, Mrs.?" Peterson was a notorious gossip who had never liked me, and her concern was almost certainly fabricated or exaggerated. But Caroline's willingness to use secondhand reports to question my competency was revealing. "Caroline, I had a brief issue with a new card that hadn't been activated properly," I explained. "It had nothing to do with confusion or memory problems." "Of course not, Mom. I didn't mean to suggest that. It's just that these little incidents can sometimes be early warning signs, and we want to make sure you get help if you need it." Early warning signs. Help. The language was becoming more clinical, more focused on potential vulnerabilities rather than current realities. But the most insidious part of their strategy was how they began using Emma as leverage for their concerns. Every conversation eventually circled back to how my situation was affecting my relationship with my granddaughter. "Emma is so worried about you living alone," Caroline would say. "She asks about you constantly, but she's afraid to call because she doesn't want to bother you if you're having a bad day." This was particularly painful because it contained just enough truth to be believable. Emma had indeed seemed more distant during our recent conversations, but I had attributed this to normal teenage development rather than concerns about my mental state. The possibility that Caroline was actively encouraging Emma to worry about my competency was both heartbreaking and infuriating. The manipulation reached a new level during the summer of 2020 when Caroline suggested that Emma's planned visit to Savannah should be canceled due to COVID-19 concerns. "Mom, I know how much you both look forward to Emma's summer visits, but Marcus and I are just not comfortable with the travel risks right now," Caroline said during a video call where Emma was notably absent. "Emma is disappointed, but she understands that we have to prioritize everyone's health and safety." Emma understands. But Emma wasn't on the call to express her own feelings about the cancellation. For the first time in 15 years, I would spend the summer without my granddaughter, and I wasn't even allowed to discuss it with her directly. "Could Emma and I at least have some video calls so we can maintain our relationship?" I asked. "Of course, we'll definitely set up some calls. Emma's schedule is pretty packed with virtual summer programs, but we'll find time." Those promised calls never materialized. Every time I asked about scheduling a conversation with Emma, there was a new excuse. She was in a virtual class. She was working on college prep. She was spending time with friends outdoors where it was safer. By the fall of 2020, I was beginning to realize that I was being systematically isolated from Emma, while being gradually positioned as a vulnerable elderly woman who might need intervention. The strategy was sophisticated and patient. They weren't making any overt moves to gain control of my assets, but they were laying the groundwork for such moves by establishing a narrative of declining competency and social isolation. It was during this period that I made a decision that probably saved me from even worse exploitation. I began documenting every conversation with Caroline and Marcus, keeping detailed notes about their suggestions, concerns, and requests. I also started recording some of our phone calls after consulting with Patricia about the legality of doing so. "You're being very smart, Eleanor," Patricia told me during one of our increasingly frequent consultations. "What you're describing sounds like the early stages of a sophisticated elder abuse scheme. They're establishing a paper trail of concerns about your competency that could later be used to justify legal action for guardianship or conservatorship." Elder abuse. Hearing the term applied to my own situation was shocking, but it also provided clarity about what I was experiencing. This wasn't just family dysfunction or generational misunderstanding. It was a calculated campaign to position me as incompetent so that they could eventually gain control of my assets. The strategy escalated significantly in late 2020, when Marcus began making more direct suggestions about my financial management. "Eleanor, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding your investment portfolio," he said during a call that Caroline had initiated, but then handed over to him. "Given the market uncertainty and your situation as a widow, you might want to consider transferring some of your assets to accounts that Caroline could help you manage. Marcus, I appreciate your concern, but my investments are being managed very competently by professionals who have handled my affairs for years." Of course they are. I'm not questioning their competency. It's just that sometimes financial advisors don't fully understand the personal dynamics of family wealth. Caroline knows your values and priorities in ways that outside advisors can't. Caroline knows my values and priorities. This from the woman who had just spent months questioning my mental competency and isolating me from my granddaughter. "I'm very comfortable with my current arrangements," I said firmly. "Absolutely. I just want you to know that the option is there, if you ever feel like you need family support with these decisions." Family support. The phrase was becoming a euphemism for family control. But the most revealing conversation came in early 2021, when Caroline called me in what sounded like genuine distress to tell me about Marcus's business problems. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something serious," she said, her voice shaking in a way that immediately got my attention. "Marcus's firm is in trouble. Really serious trouble." As she told me about the financial crisis, the failing projects, the mounting debts, the potential loss of their house and Emma's school, I felt my heart break for my daughter and granddaughter. But even in my emotional response, I noticed things about the conversation that seemed carefully orchestrated. The timing was perfect. Just when I was beginning to question their motives, they presented me with a crisis that required immediate financial intervention. The amount they needed, $400,000, was substantial enough to require major financial restructuring on my part, but not so large as to seem unreasonable for a family emergency. Most tellingly, Caroline had prepared detailed information about exactly how the money should be structured, not as a loan, but as a trust fund that would provide them with ongoing monthly income. This wasn't a desperate family reaching out for help. This was a sophisticated request with specific legal and financial parameters. "Caroline, this is a very large amount of money," I said carefully. "I'll need to discuss this with Patricia and review all the options." "Of course, Mom. I understand this is a big ask. It's just that we're running out of time, and Emma's future is at stake." Emma's future. Once again, my granddaughter was being used as leverage to encourage my cooperation. But what struck me most about that conversation was what Caroline didn't say. She never asked about my own financial situation or whether helping them would create problems for me. She never suggested alternative solutions or offered to explore other options. She simply presented the crisis and the specific solution she wanted, as if my role was to provide funding, rather than to be consulted as a family member with my own needs and concerns. After we hung up, I sat in William's study for a long time, surrounded by his business books and legal documents, trying to process what had just happened. On one level, the request seemed reasonable. A desperate daughter asking her financially secure mother for help during a genuine crisis. But on another level, it felt like the culmination of months of careful manipulation designed to position me as a source of funding, rather than a person deserving of respect and consideration. I called Patricia immediately and asked her to begin researching trust structures that would protect both my interests and Caroline's family. But I also asked her to investigate Marcus's business situation to verify the crisis he had described. Eleanor, if you're going to provide this level of financial support, we need to make sure you're fully informed about what you're supporting, Patricia said. Let me do some due diligence before we finalize any arrangements. What Patricia discovered over the next 2 weeks was enlightening and disturbing. Marcus's firm was indeed in financial trouble, but the problems weren't entirely due to market conditions or unforeseeable circumstances. There was evidence of poor financial management, risky project decisions, and a pattern of living beyond their means that stretched back several years. More concerning was what Patricia learned about Caroline and Marcus's personal finances. They had been maintaining an expensive lifestyle, the historic house, private schools, country club memberships, luxury vacations, that was completely unsustainable on Marcus's income, even when his business was successful. Eleanor, based on what I can determine, they've been living on credit and borrowed money for at least 3 years, Patricia told me. This crisis didn't develop overnight. They've been heading toward financial disaster for a long time. Are you suggesting they've been planning to ask me for money? I'm suggesting that their financial situation has been unsustainable for years, and they had to know that eventually they would need a major infusion of capital from somewhere. Your recent widowhood made you a logical target for that kind of request. A logical target. The phrase was harsh but accurate. They had spent months conditioning me to see myself as vulnerable and isolated while positioning themselves as my concerned protectors. When the financial crisis arrived, I was primed to see helping them as both a family obligation and a way to maintain my connection to Emma. Despite these revelations, I decided to help them, but with strict legal protections that would prevent the kind of exploitation Patricia and I both feared. The trust structure we created would provide Caroline with substantial monthly support while preserving the principal and maintaining my control over the assets. But what I couldn't have anticipated was how quickly that financial support would transform from grateful assistance into entitled expectation, and how efficiently Caroline and Marcus would use my generosity to complete the process of erasing me from Emma's life, while publicly humiliating me at the event I had unknowingly funded. As I sat in the back of St. Augustine's Cathedral, holding that devastating name tag, I realized that the phone call about their financial crisis hadn't been the beginning of their manipulation. It had been the successful conclusion of a campaign that had started the moment William died. They had spent over a year positioning me as a vulnerable, isolated elderly woman whose judgment was questionable and whose primary value was financial. When they finally asked for money, I was so relieved to be needed and included that I readily agreed to fund my own systematic exclusion from the family I loved. But what Caroline and Marcus didn't understand was that their manipulation had been so thorough, so calculating, and so cruel that it had finally opened my eyes to exactly who they really were. And the woman they had worked so hard to characterize as vulnerable and confused was about to show them exactly how dangerous it could be to underestimate a Montgomery woman who had been pushed too far. The absent old lady was about to become very present indeed. And the first lesson would be about the difference between generosity and weakness, a lesson that Caroline and Marcus were about to learn in the most public and devastating way possible. The trust fund was established in March 2021, and for the first few months, Caroline and Marcus maintained the pretense of grateful family members who had been saved by my generosity. But as the initial crisis passed and the monthly payments became routine, their behavior began to shift in ways that revealed their true intentions and character. The first red flag came just 6 weeks after the trust was finalized, during what should have been a celebratory phone call about Emma's acceptance to several prestigious colleges. "Mom, we have wonderful news," Caroline said, her voice bright with excitement. Emma was accepted to SCAD, just like she always dreamed. She's also been accepted to Parsons in New York and the Rhode Island School of Design. We're so proud of her. I was genuinely thrilled for Emma. The Savannah College of Art and Design had always been her first choice, and it would bring her closer to me geographically. That's wonderful. When can we all sit down to discuss her college plans and how to use her education fund? There was a brief pause before Caroline responded. "Actually, Mom, we've already made most of the decisions. Emma's going to attend SCAD, and we've worked out all the financial arrangements. The education fund you mentioned will definitely be helpful for covering some of the expenses." Some of the expenses? I had established a separate education fund, specifically for Emma's college costs, worth over $200,000, which should have been more than enough to cover 4 years at any art school in the country. But Caroline was talking about it as if it were a small contribution to a larger financial plan. "Caroline, I'd like to speak with Emma directly about her college plans. This is one of the most important decisions of her life, and I want to make sure she knows I'm supporting her dreams." "Oh, Mom, that's so sweet. But Emma's incredibly busy right now with senior year activities and graduation preparation. She knows how much you love her and support her education. That's what really matters." Once again, I was being prevented from having direct contact with Emma about a major life decision. And once again, Caroline was managing the conversation to keep me at arm's length while accessing my financial support. "Caroline, I insist on speaking with Emma before any final decisions are made about her education. I want to understand her goals and make sure the education fund is structured to best support her dreams." "Mom, you're being a little controlling about this. Emma is 18 years old. She's capable of making her own decisions about college. We don't want to pressure her by making her feel like she has to perform for her grandmother's approval." Controlling. The word hit me like a slap. I was being called controlling for wanting to have a conversation with my granddaughter about her education that I was funding. Meanwhile, Caroline and Marcus had made all the decisions without including me in any of the discussions. But what really alarmed me was the suggestion that speaking with me would be pressure for Emma. When had my relationship with my granddaughter become something she needed to be protected from? The second major red flag occurred a month later, when I discovered that Caroline and Marcus had made significant changes to their lifestyle, despite claiming to be in financial recovery mode. Learned about this through social media, of all places. Caroline had always been active on Instagram, posting carefully curated photos of their family life. But after the trust was established, her posts became noticeably more extravagant. Photos of expensive dinners at Charleston's most exclusive restaurants appeared weekly, pictures of new designer furniture being delivered to their house, images of Marcus's brand new luxury car, which he had apparently purchased to celebrate the firm's recovery. Most telling was a photo Caroline posted from what appeared to be a very expensive spa weekend in Asheville, North Carolina. The caption read, "Sometimes you need to invest in self-care and relaxation. Grateful for the financial stability that allows us to prioritize our mental health and family well-being." Financial stability? They were describing the $8,000 monthly payments from my trust fund as their own financial stability, and they were using that money to fund luxury experiences while telling me they were in recovery mode. I called Caroline the next day to express my concerns. "Caroline, I've been seeing your social media posts, and I'm confused about your family's financial situation. The lifestyle you're showing doesn't seem consistent with a family that's recovering from a serious financial crisis. Mom, I don't understand what you're questioning. We told you that Marcus's business is getting back on track, and we're finally able to enjoy some of the things we had to give up during the difficult period. But Caroline, the trust fund was established to help you through a crisis, not to fund luxury vacations and expensive purchases. If you're financially stable enough for spa weekends and new cars, perhaps we should discuss reducing the monthly payments. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. When Caroline finally spoke, her tone had shifted from defensive to cold. Mom, I'm really disappointed that you're monitoring our social media and questioning how we choose to spend our money. The trust fund provides basic support for our family expenses, but we're not going to live like paupers just to satisfy your need to control our lifestyle. Control our lifestyle. There was that word again. Control. I wasn't trying to control their lifestyle. I was trying to understand whether my financial support was still necessary and whether it was being used for its intended purpose. Caroline, I'm not trying to control anything. I'm simply trying to understand whether the crisis that prompted the trust fund has been resolved. The crisis was about more than just immediate cash flow, Mom. It was about long-term financial security and stability. The trust fund provides that security, but it doesn't mean we have to live in fear of spending money on anything beyond basic necessities. Long-term financial security. The trust fund that was supposed to be temporary. Assistance during a crisis had apparently become their permanent financial foundation. The third red flag was perhaps the most disturbing. I began to notice that Caroline and Marcus were using my trust fund payments not just for their own expenses, but as leverage to gain social status and influence in Charleston society. This became clear during a conversation in late summer 2021, when Caroline excitedly told me about Marcus's appointment to the board of the Charleston Historic Preservation Society. Marcus is so honored to be invited to join the board, Caroline said. It's a really prestigious position, and it will be wonderful for his business network and our social connections. That's wonderful, I said. I'm sure Marcus will contribute valuable expertise to their work. Oh, he will. And Mom, you'll be so proud to know that our family's financial contribution to the Preservation Society was one of the factors that helped secure his appointment. They were really impressed by our commitment to Charleston's historic architecture, our family's financial contribution. I felt my blood run cold as I realized what she was saying. Caroline, what financial contribution are you referring to? We made a significant donation to their capital campaign for the Historic District Revitalization Project. It was a wonderful way to support the community and demonstrate our commitment to Charleston's cultural heritage. How much did you donate? $25,000. It's tax-deductible, of course, and it's the kind of philanthropic involvement that benefits Marcus's career and Emma's future social connections. $25,000. More than 3 months of trust fund payments used to buy social status and business connections for Marcus. They were using my money to purchase influence and prestige while telling me they were still recovering from a financial crisis. Caroline, that donation was made with money from the trust fund. Mom, the trust fund provides us with monthly income that we can use for family priorities. Supporting the Preservation Society is definitely a family priority. It benefits our standing in the community and creates opportunities for Emma's future. Family priorities. Emma's future. They had found ways to justify any expenditure by framing it as benefiting the family or my granddaughter, while conveniently ignoring the fact that they were using my money to buy social advantages I had never agreed to fund. But what truly shocked me was the revelation that came next. Actually, Mom, I'm so glad you brought this up because I wanted to tell you about another opportunity that's come up. The Charleston Museum is looking for major donors for their new contemporary art wing, and they've approached us about making a lead gift It would be an incredible honor for our family name to be associated with such an important cultural institution. Our family name. They wanted to use my money to put their names on a museum wing, gaining permanent recognition and social status, funded by my trust fund. Caroline, how much are they asking for? It's a significant commitment, $100,000 over 2 years. But Mom, think about the legacy this would create for Emma. She could have internship opportunities at the museum, networking connections in the art world, and the pride of knowing her family contributed to Charleston's cultural landscape. $100,000, more than a year's worth of trust fund payments used to buy naming rights and social prestige. And they were framing it as a gift to Emma, using my granddaughter as emotional leverage to justify what was essentially a massive expenditure of my money for their social advancement. Caroline, the trust fund was not established to finance charitable giving or social positioning. It was meant to provide basic family support during a financial crisis. Mom, this is basic family support. Emma's future depends partly on social connections and community involvement. We're not asking you to fund frivolous expenses. We're asking you to invest in opportunities that will benefit our entire family for generations. Invest in opportunities. The language had completely shifted from crisis assistance to investment in their social advancement. The trust fund that was supposed to be temporary help had become their permanent source of funding for a lifestyle and social position they couldn't afford on their own. The fourth major red flag came in the fall of 2021, when I tried to arrange a visit to Charleston to see Emma before she started college. Caroline, I'd love to come visit for a weekend before Emma leaves for SCAD. I want to spend some quality time with her and help her prepare for this new chapter. Oh, Mom, that's such a sweet thought, but this is really not a good time. Emma's schedule is absolutely packed with graduation activities, college preparation, and social commitments. Plus, we're in the middle of some home renovations that are making the house pretty chaotic. Home renovations. This was news to me, and given the source of their income, it was concerning news. What kind of renovations are you doing? We're updating the kitchen and adding a master suite addition. Marcus found this amazing architect who specializes in historic home renovations, and we're finally able to make the improvements we've always wanted. Finally able. With money from my trust fund. Caroline, how much are these renovations costing? It's a significant investment, but it will add substantial value to the property. The kitchen alone is going to be featured in Charleston Home and Garden magazine. It's the kind of project that enhances our family's reputation and creates a more beautiful environment for Emma when she comes home from college. Emma, who would be living in college dormitories and would barely be home. They were spending tens of thousands of dollars of my money on home improvements and justifying it as being for my granddaughter's benefit. Caroline, I think we need to have a serious conversation about the trust fund and how it's being used. Mom, I'm really hurt that you're questioning our financial decisions. We've been incredibly responsible with the trust fund money, and everything we're doing is for the long-term benefit of our family. If you don't trust our judgment, maybe we need to reconsider this whole arrangement. Reconsider this whole arrangement. The threat was subtle but clear. If I questioned their spending, they might cut off my access to the family entirely. The fifth and most painful red flag came during the holidays of 2021, when I was once again excluded from family celebrations. Mom, we're so disappointed that you won't be able to join us for Christmas this year, Caroline said during a phone call in early December. But we completely understand that the renovations make it impossible to have houseguests right now. I had never said I couldn't join them for Christmas. In fact, I had been hoping for an invitation and had kept my calendar clear in anticipation of spending the holidays with Emma before she started college. Caroline, I never said I couldn't come. For Christmas, I've been hoping we could spend the holidays together. Oh, Mom, I think there's been a miscommunication. When we talked about the renovations, I thought you understood that having guests would be impossible right now. The kitchen is completely torn apart, and we don't even have a functional guest bathroom. There had been no such conversation. Caroline was creating a fictional discussion to justify excluding me from Christmas while making it seem like the decision had been mutual. What about Emma? I'd really like to spend some time with her before she leaves for college. Emma's schedule is absolutely crazy right now. She's working at an internship, finishing college applications for backup schools, and spending time with friends before graduation. She feels terrible that she won't get to see you, but you know how busy teenagers are. Emma feels terrible. But I wasn't hearing this from Emma herself. I was hearing it secondhand from Caroline, who had been systematically preventing direct communication between us. Could I at least speak with Emma directly about the holidays? Of course. She's at work right now, but I'll have her call you tonight. Emma never called. When I followed up the next day, Caroline had another excuse. Emma had been called in for extra shifts at her internship and wouldn't be free until the weekend. When the weekend came, there was another excuse. By this point, I was beginning to realize that I was being systematically prevented from having any direct relationship with Emma. Every interaction was filtered through Caroline. Every conversation was managed. Every plan was controlled. The pattern became even clearer during Emma's graduation in the spring of 2022. I learned about the graduation ceremony not from Caroline, but from a social media post showing Emma in her cap and gown. When I called to ask about the ceremony, Caroline was apologetic, but not particularly convincing. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. The graduation was very small and intimate, just immediate family. We didn't think to invite extended family because of space limitations." Extended family. I had gone from being Emma's beloved grandmother to extended family who didn't merit a graduation invitation. Caroline. I would have loved to be there for Emma's graduation. It's one of the most important days of her life. I know, Mom, and Emma was disappointed too. But honestly, the ceremony was very brief and not very exciting. We took lots of photos that we'll share with you. Photos that I would see on social media, like every other stranger following Caroline's Instagram account. But the most alarming red flag came in the summer of 2022, when I discovered that Caroline and Marcus had been telling people in Charleston that I was experiencing cognitive decline. I learned this through a mutual acquaintance, Margaret Thornton, who had moved to Charleston from Savannah and happened to know Caroline through social circles. Eleanor, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but I ran into Caroline at a charity luncheon last week, and she seemed very concerned about your health, Margaret said during a phone call. She mentioned that you've been having some memory issues and that the family is worried about you living alone. Memory issues. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Margaret, I'm not having any memory issues. I don't know why Caroline would say such a thing. Oh, I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding. You know how people can exaggerate when they're worried about their parents. Caroline spoke very lovingly about you, but she did seem genuinely concerned about your well-being. After hanging up with Margaret, I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the familiar objects of my daily life, trying to process what I had learned. Caroline was actively spreading the narrative that I was experiencing cognitive decline, building a public record of concerns about my mental competency. This wasn't just financial exploitation. This was character assassination designed to discredit me if I ever tried to challenge their access to my money or question their treatment of me. Called Patricia Hendricks immediately. Patricia, I need to see you as soon as possible. I think Caroline and Marcus are laying the groundwork to challenge my competency. Eleanor, come in tomorrow morning. And I want you to start documenting everything, every conversation, every interaction, every instance where they've misrepresented your condition or prevented you from communicating with Emma. The next few months were a blur of legal consultations and evidence gathering. Patricia helped me understand that what I was experiencing was a textbook case of financial elder abuse, combined with systematic isolation and character assassination. Eleanor, They've been executing a sophisticated long-term strategy, Patricia explained during one of our meetings. First, they established a narrative of vulnerability and declining competency. Then, they positioned themselves as your concerned caretakers. When they requested financial support, you were primed to see it as necessary protection rather than exploitation. Now they're using that financial dependence to control your access to Emma while spreading stories about your mental condition to justify their control. What can I do about it? We need to be very careful and very strategic. They've built a paper trail of concerns about your competency, and they have financial dependency that they could claim makes them your caretakers. If we move too quickly or too obviously, they could claim that your actions prove their concerns about your mental state. So I'm trapped? Not trapped, but we need to be smart. We need to document their misuse of the trust fund, gather evidence of their character assassination campaign, and build a case that shows their exploitation rather than your incompetency. As I left Patricia's office that day, I realized that the wedding invitation I would receive months later wouldn't be a surprise. It would be the culmination of everything Caroline and Marcus had been working toward. They had spent over 2 years positioning me as a vulnerable, incompetent elderly woman whose primary value was financial. The humiliating name tag would be the final public declaration of their success in erasing me from Emma's life while maintaining access to my money. But what they didn't understand was that every red flag they had shown me, every manipulation they had attempted, every lie they had told, had been carefully documented by a woman who was far from the confused, helpless victim they thought they were exploiting. The absent old lady was about to become very present indeed. And Caroline and Marcus were about to learn that underestimating a Montgomery woman's intelligence and strength was the biggest mistake they could possibly make. The warning signs had been ignored for too long. Now it was time for the consequences to begin. As I sat in that back corner of St. Augustine's Cathedral, holding the humiliating name tag that reduced me to the absent old lady, I felt something shift inside me that was far more powerful than hurt or anger. For the first time in 3 years, I saw my situation with absolute clarity. This wasn't just about money or family dysfunction. This was about 2 people who had systematically destroyed my relationship with my granddaughter, while using my love and generosity to fund their own social ambitions. But what Caroline and Marcus didn't know, as they basked in the admiration of Charleston's social elite at their $80,000 wedding funded by my trust fund, was that the woman they had worked so hard to marginalize was also the woman who held complete legal control over their financial future. The realization came to me with startling clarity as I watched Emma walk down the aisle in her $15,000 dress. Every beautiful detail of this wedding, the flowers, the music, the elegant reception venue, the designer gowns, the champagne, the 5-course dinner, was being paid for with my money. And yet I had been relegated to the back corner with a name tag that announced to everyone present that I was irrelevant to this family. I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app. If Caroline and Marcus wanted to play strategic games, they were about to discover that they were dealing with someone who had learned strategy from one of Georgia's most successful businessmen. My late husband William hadn't built a real estate empire by being naive or easily manipulated, and he had taught me everything he knew about patience, planning, and decisive action. As the ceremony concluded and guests began moving toward the reception area, I made my way to a quiet corner of the cathedral and began making phone calls. The first call was to Patricia Hendricks, my attorney. Patricia, it's Eleanor. I need you to prepare immediate documentation for the complete revocation of the Caroline Whitfield Family Trust. Eleanor, are you sure? This is a major decision and… Patricia, I am sitting in the back corner of my granddaughter's wedding with a name tag that identifies me as the absent old lady while watching an $80,000 celebration that I unknowingly funded. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Where are you right now? At St. Augustine's Cathedral in Charleston. The wedding is today, and I want the trust revocation to be legally binding before the reception ends. Eleanor, I can… Have the documentation prepared within 2 hours, but you'll need witnesses and I'll handle the witnesses. How quickly can you drive to Charleston? I'm leaving my office right now. Eleanor, are you prepared for the consequences of this decision? Patricia, the consequences of not making this decision have been 3 years of systematic abuse and manipulation. I'm more than ready for the consequences of taking back control of my own money. The second call was to James Morrison, my banker and financial advisor. James, this is Eleanor Montgomery. I need you to immediately freeze all disbursements from the Caroline Whitfield Family Trust, effective today. Mrs. Montgomery, that's a significant action. Can you give me some context? James, I'm revoking the trust entirely. Patricia Hendricks will be sending you the legal documentation within hours. Until then, I want all payments suspended. Mrs. Montgomery, I should mention that there's a scheduled disbursement for Monday, the monthly $8,000 payment. James, there will be no more monthly payments, ever. Please ensure that every financial institution associated with the trust is notified immediately. I understand. Mrs. Montgomery, this will have immediate and significant impact on the beneficiaries. James, the beneficiaries have had 3 years of financial support from me. What they chose to do with that support, and with their relationship with me, has demonstrated exactly why this decision is necessary. The third call was to Dr. Robert Chen, a psychiatrist who specialized in competency evaluations and whom Patricia had recommended months earlier. Dr. Chen, this is Eleanor Montgomery. Patricia Hendricks referred me to you several months ago. I need an emergency competency evaluation today. Mrs. Montgomery, emergency evaluations are highly unusual unless there's an immediate medical crisis. Dr. Chen, I'm about to revoke a significant family trust, and I anticipate that the beneficiaries will challenge my mental capacity. I want a professional evaluation completed before I take that action. I see. Where are you located? Charleston, South Carolina. I can come to your office immediately. Actually, Mrs. Montgomery, I'm in Charleston today for a conference. I could meet you at my hotel within the hour if this is truly urgent. Dr. Chen, it's more urgent than you can imagine. As I made these calls, I watched the wedding reception begin in the distance. Caroline and Marcus were greeting guests with radiant smiles, accepting congratulations and gifts, playing the role of the perfect Charleston couple whose financial success and social status had made this elegant celebration possible. What they didn't know was that their financial success was ending in approximately 90 minutes. I took a taxi to Dr. Chen's hotel, where I spent 45 minutes undergoing the most comprehensive mental competency evaluation of my life. Dr. Chen tested my memory, reasoning ability, understanding of financial concepts, and capacity to make informed decisions. Mrs. Montgomery, he said as he completed his assessment, your cognitive function is exceptional for someone of any age, much less 70 years old. Your understanding of the financial and legal implications of your planned actions is sophisticated and well-reasoned. You are absolutely competent to make any decisions about your assets. Dr. Chen, would you be willing to provide written documentation of this evaluation? I'll have a detailed report prepared within the hour. Mrs. Montgomery, may I ask why you felt this evaluation was necessary? Dr. Chen, I have reason to believe that certain family members have been spreading the narrative that I'm experiencing cognitive decline. I want professional documentation that those claims are completely false. Based on my evaluation, any such claims would be entirely without merit. When Patricia arrived in Charleston, we met at her hotel room to complete the trust revocation documentation. The paperwork was extensive, pages of legal language that would effectively return complete control of my assets to me, while terminating Caroline and Marcus's access to any of my money. Eleanor, once you sign these documents, the trust is immediately and permanently revoked, Patricia explained. Caroline and Marcus will receive written notification within 24 hours, and their next scheduled payment will be canceled. Patricia, I want them to receive that notification at the reception. Can you arrange for it to be delivered tonight? Eleanor, that's Unusual. Are you sure you want to create a public scene? Patricia, they created a public scene when they gave me a name tag identifying me as the absent old lady at my granddaughter's wedding. I'm simply responding in kind. As I signed the documents, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. For 3 years, I had been funding my own marginalization, paying for the privilege of being excluded from the family I loved. Now, finally, I was taking back control. The 4th call I made was to Emma herself. I had managed to get Emma's cell phone number from her college paperwork, which Caroline had reluctantly shared months earlier. As the reception continued in the background, I called my granddaughter directly for the first time in over a year. Hello? Emma's voice was tentative. She didn't recognize the number. Emma, it's Grandma Eleanor. Grandma Eleanor. Oh my God. I'm so sorry about the wedding. Mom said you couldn't come because you weren't feeling well. Couldn't come because I wasn't feeling well. Even on her wedding day, Caroline was lying about me to my own granddaughter. Emma, I'm actually at your wedding. I've been sitting in the back of the cathedral for the entire ceremony. What? That's impossible. Mom said you weren't able to travel. Emma, I need you to meet me somewhere private where we can talk. There are things you need to know about what's been happening in our family. Grandma, I'm confused. This is my wedding day, and I don't understand what's going on. Emma, I know this is your special day, and I don't want to ruin it, but we need to have a conversation about why I was given a name tag identifying me as the absent old lady when I've been here the entire time. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for several seconds. Grandma, what name tag? Emma, ask your mother what name tag I was given for the wedding. Grandma, I'm coming to find you right now. 10 minutes later, Emma appeared in the hotel lobby where I was waiting, still in her wedding dress but looking confused and distressed. Grandma Eleanor, I don't understand what's happening. Mom told me you weren't able to come to the wedding because of health problems. I showed Emma the name tag that I had kept as evidence. Her face went pale as she read, "The absent old lady." Grandma, who gave you this? The wedding coordinator, acting on instructions from your parents. Emma sank into a chair beside me, her beautiful wedding dress pooling around her. Grandma, I don't understand. Why would they do this? And why did Mom tell me you weren't coming? Emma, that's what I need to explain to you. For the past 3 years, your parents have been systematically excluding me from your life while using my money to fund their lifestyle. This wedding, this dress, this entire celebration, it's all been paid for with money from a trust fund I established to help your family during a financial crisis. What trust fund? I spent the next hour explaining everything to Emma. The original crisis phone call, the establishment of the trust fund, the monthly payments, the gradual exclusion from her life, the manipulation tactics, and the character assassination campaign that had been conducted against me. Emma listened in stunned silence, occasionally asking questions that revealed just how thoroughly Caroline and Marcus had controlled information between us. Grandma, I tried to call you so many times, but Mom always said you were too tired or too busy or not feeling well enough for long conversations. Emma, I was never too tired or too busy to talk to you. I've been desperate to maintain our relationship. And the summer visits that stopped. I was told you were too busy with activities and college preparation. Grandma, I begged Mom to let me visit you last summer. She said you didn't want guests because you were feeling overwhelmed. As the truth emerged, Emma became increasingly agitated and angry. Grandma, are you telling me that my parents have been lying to both of us for 3 years? That they've been keeping us apart while using your money to pay for our lifestyle? Emma, I'm afraid that's exactly what I'm telling you. And this wedding? They used your money to pay for this wedding without even inviting you properly? Emma, I was invited, but as you can see from the name tag, I was relegated to the status of an unwanted obligation rather than your beloved grandmother. Emma stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger. "Grandma, I need to confront them about this." "Emma, wait. Before you do anything, you need to understand something else. I've just revoked the trust fund. As of tonight, your parents will no longer be receiving monthly payments from me." What does that mean? It means that the financial support I've been providing for 3 years is ending. It also means that your parents are going to face some very difficult financial realities very quickly. Emma sat back down, processing this information. "Grandma, what about my college education?" "Emma, your college fund is separate from the trust fund your parents have been accessing. Your education is completely secure and will never be affected by the decisions your parents have made." "But what about Mom and Dad?" "Emma, your parents are adults who have been living on my money while systematically excluding me from your life and spreading false stories about my mental health. They'll need to figure out how to support themselves using their own resources." Just then, Caroline appeared in the hotel lobby, clearly looking for Emma. "Emma! There you are! Everyone's been wondering where the bride disappeared to." Caroline's smile faded when she saw me sitting beside Emma. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "Hello, Caroline. I'm having a conversation with my granddaughter about why I was given a name tag identifying me as the absent old lady at her wedding." Caroline's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "Mom, I think there's been some sort of misunderstanding about the seating arrangements." "Caroline, there's been no misunderstanding. Emma and I have been discussing the lies you've been telling both of us for the past 3 years." "Emma, honey, your grandmother is confused. She hasn't been feeling well lately, and sometimes she misinterprets things." Emma stood up, her wedding dress rustling with the force of her movement. "Mom, stop lying. Grandma Eleanor has explained everything to me. How could you keep us apart for 3 years? How could you use her money to pay for this wedding while treating her like she was unwanted?" Caroline's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, denial, anger, and finally, cold calculation. "Emma, you're being manipulated by someone who isn't thinking clearly. Your grandmother has been having memory issues and paranoid thoughts. That's why we've been limiting her contact with you, to protect you from exactly this kind of confused outburst." "Mom, Grandma Eleanor isn't confused. She has documentation of everything you've done: the trust fund, the monthly payments, the lies about why I couldn't visit her, the lies about why she couldn't visit us. Emma, whatever your grandmother has told you is the product of an elderly mind that isn't processing information correctly." That's when I stood up and faced my daughter directly. "Caroline, I have just revoked the trust fund. As of tonight, you will no longer receive monthly payments from my assets. I have also undergone a professional competency evaluation today, which confirms that my mental capacity is completely intact. Dr. Chen's report will be available if you'd like to challenge my decision in court." Caroline went white. "Mom, you can't be serious." "Caroline, I have never been more serious about anything in my life. You have spent 3 years using my money to fund your lifestyle while systematically excluding me from Emma's life. You have spread false stories about my mental health to justify your control. You have turned my granddaughter's wedding into a public humiliation for me. The financial support ends tonight. Mom, if you do this, you'll destroy our family. Caroline, you destroyed our family the moment you decided to treat me as a source of funding rather than as a person deserving of love and respect." Marcus appeared, at that moment, clearly having been sent to find Caroline. "What's going on here? People are asking where the bride and her mother disappeared to." Caroline turned to Marcus with panic in her eyes. "She's revoked the trust fund." Marcus's expression went from confusion to fury in seconds. "Eleanor, you can't do this to us. We have financial obligations, commitments, contracts based on the trust fund income. Marcus, You have financial obligations that you should have been meeting with your own income rather than mine. The fact that you've built your lifestyle around my money rather than your own earning capacity is not my responsibility to maintain. Eleanor, this is vindictive and cruel. We're family. Marcus, family members don't humiliate each other with degrading name tags at weddings. Family members don't spread false stories about cognitive decline. Family members don't systematically exclude elderly relatives from grandchildren's lives while taking their money. Emma, who had been listening to this exchange with growing anger, finally exploded. Mom, Dad, how could you do this? How could you lie to me for 3 years about Grandma Eleanor? How could you take her money while treating her so horribly? Caroline reached for Emma's hands. Honey, you don't understand the complexity of adult relationships and financial management. Emma jerked her hands away. I understand that you've been lying to me and stealing from Grandma Eleanor while making me complicit in hurting someone I love. Emma, we haven't been stealing. The trust fund was a legal arrangement. A legal arrangement that you manipulated her into by lying about your financial situation and then abused by using the money for social status rather than basic needs. Marcus stepped forward, his face red with anger. Emma, you're being dramatic. Your grandmother is not the victim here. Dad, she's sitting at my wedding with a name tag calling her the absent old lady, while wearing a dress that cost more than most people make in a month, a dress paid for with her money. How is she not the victim? At that moment, a hotel employee approached with an envelope. Excuse me, are you Mrs. Caroline Whitfield? Yes. This was delivered for you with instructions to hand-deliver it tonight. Caroline opened the envelope and read the formal legal notification that the trust fund had been revoked. Her hands began shaking as she read the document. Mom, you can't do this. We'll challenge this in court. We'll prove that you're not competent to make this decision. I pulled out Dr. Chen's written competency evaluation, which had been delivered while we were talking. Caroline, this is a professional psychiatric evaluation completed today, confirming that my mental capacity is completely intact. Any legal challenge you bring will be met with extensive documentation of your financial exploitation and character assassination campaign. Patricia Hendricks appeared at that moment. I had asked her to join us at the hotel. Mrs. Whitfield, I'm Patricia Hendricks, Mrs. Montgomery's attorney. The trust revocation is legally binding as of 1 hour ago. If you'd like to discuss the situation, I'm available to explain your options. Caroline looked around desperately. This is insane. Mom, you're destroying 3 generations of our family over money. Caroline, I'm not destroying anything over money. I'm protecting myself from people who have demonstrated that they see me as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be loved. The money was never the issue. The disrespect was the issue. Emma, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. Mom, I want to know something. Did you or did you not give the wedding coordinator instructions to give Grandma Eleanor a name tag identifying her as the absent old lady? Caroline hesitated for just a moment too long. Emma, the seating arrangements were complicated and, Mom, did you or did you not tell me that Grandma Eleanor couldn't come to the wedding because she wasn't feeling well? Another hesitation. Emma, your grandmother's health has been a concern. Mom, answer the question. Did you lie to me about Grandma Eleanor's health to prevent her from being properly included in my wedding? Caroline's silence was the answer Emma needed. Mom, I can't believe you would do this. On my wedding day. You made me complicit in hurting someone I love by lying to me about why she couldn't be here properly. Emma, everything we did was to protect you from your grandmothers, increasing confusion and negativity. Mom, stop lying. Grandma Eleanor isn't confused or negative. She's been excluded and mistreated while paying for the privilege of being treated badly. Marcus tried a different approach. Emma, think about your future, your college education, your opportunities, your financial security. All of that could be affected by this decision. Emma turned to me. Grandma, is that true? Emma, your education fund is completely separate and secure. Your financial security for college and beyond is guaranteed, regardless of any decisions I make about your parents' access to my money. And my relationship with you? Emma, my relationship with you is the most important thing in the world to me. Nothing your parents have done or will do can change that. Emma looked at her parents with a mixture of sadness and disgust. Mom, Dad, I'm ashamed of what you've done. You've taken advantage of someone who loved us unconditionally, and you've made me an unwitting participant in hurting her. Emma, you're being manipulated. No, Mom. I've been manipulated for 3 years by people who lied to me about someone I love while using her money to pay for our lifestyle. The manipulation is ending tonight. Caroline made one last desperate attempt. Mom, please reconsider this. We can work out our differences, rebuild our relationship, find a way to move forward as a family. I looked at my daughter, the brilliant, charming woman I had raised to value integrity and compassion, who had somehow become someone capable of systematic cruelty and manipulation. Caroline. We could have worked out our differences at any point. Over the past 3 years, you chose instead to exclude me while taking my money. You chose to spread false stories about my mental health. You chose to humiliate me at your daughter's wedding. These weren't mistakes or misunderstandings. They were calculated choices that revealed exactly who you've become. So what happens? Now? Now you and Marcus figure out how to support yourselves and your lifestyle using your own resources. Now you live with the consequences of treating family members as sources of funding rather than people deserving of respect. Now you discover whether the social status you bought with my money was worth destroying your relationship with me. And Emma? Emma is an adult who can make her own decisions about her relationships with all of us. But those decisions will be based on truth rather than the lies you've been telling her. As we spoke, wedding guests began wandering into the outside hotel lobby, looking for the bride and wondering why the reception had been interrupted. Emma stood up, smoothing her wedding dress. I need to go back to my reception and try to salvage what's left of my wedding day. But this conversation isn't over. We're going to have a lot more discussions about 3 years of lies and manipulation. She turned to me. Grandma Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I had no idea what they were doing to you. I love you, and I want to rebuild our relationship based on truth. Emma, I love you too, and I've never stopped wanting a real relationship with you. She turned back to her parents. As for you two, I'm disappointed beyond words. You've damaged relationships that should have been sacred, and you've made me complicit in hurting someone I love. I don't know how long it will take me to forgive you for that. As Emma walked back toward the reception, Caroline and Marcus were left standing in the hotel lobby with Patricia and me. Mom, Caroline said quietly, what happens if we can't manage financially without the trust fund payments? Caroline, you'll do what every other family does when they face financial challenges. You'll adjust your lifestyle to match your income. You'll make difficult choices about expenses, and you'll learn to live within your means. But the house payments, Emma's school expenses, our social commitments? Caroline, you'll figure it out. The same way you would have figured it out if I had never established the trust fund in the first place. Mom, please, I'm begging you to reconsider. Caroline, I considered this decision very carefully. I weighed 3 years of evidence about how you treat family members who love you. I evaluated the pattern of lies, manipulation, and financial exploitation that has characterized our relationship since your father died. I assessed the damage you've done to my relationship with Emma through systematic exclusion and character assassination. This decision isn't impulsive or vindictive. It's the rational response of someone who finally understands exactly how they've been treated. Patricia stepped forward. Mrs. Whitfield, if you'd like to discuss options for legal challenge, I should mention that Mrs. Montgomery has extensive documentation of financial misuse and manipulation tactics that would likely be introduced as evidence in any court proceedings. What kind of documentation? 3 years of recorded phone calls, social media posts showing lifestyle expenditures inconsistent with claimed financial distress, witness statements about false claims regarding Mrs. Montgomery's mental health, and detailed financial records showing how trust fund payments were used for luxury expenses rather than basic needs. Caroline and Marcus exchanged glances. "Mom, you recorded our phone calls?" Caroline: "I documented everything once I realized I was being systematically manipulated. I'm not the confused, helpless elderly woman you've been describing to people. I'm someone who recognized a pattern of abuse and took steps to protect herself." "We weren't abusing you." Caroline: "Financial exploitation of elderly family members is abuse. Character assassination is abuse. Systematic exclusion from grandchildren's lives is abuse. The fact that you can't see it that way is exactly why this decision was necessary." Marcus finally spoke up. "Eleanor, what would it take for you to reconsider?" Marcus: "There is nothing you could say or do that would make me reconsider. You've shown me exactly who you are and what you value. The relationship is damaged beyond repair." "And Emma?" "Emma will make her own decisions about her relationships with all of us. But those decisions will be based on truth rather than manipulation." 2. Hours later, the wedding reception was winding down. Though most guests had sensed the underlying tension and family drama that had disrupted the celebration, Emma had returned to her role as bride, but the joy had gone out of the evening for everyone involved. As I prepared to leave Charleston, Emma found me in the hotel lobby. "Grandma Eleanor, what happens now?" Emma: "Now you start college with a secure education fund and the knowledge that someone loves you unconditionally. Now you build relationships based on honesty and mutual respect. Now you learn the difference between family members who love you and family members who use you." "What about Mom and Dad?" Emma: "Your parents will face the consequences of their choices. They'll need to adjust their lifestyle to match their actual income. They'll need to rebuild relationships based on trust rather than financial dependence. And they'll need to decide whether their social status was worth the damage they've done to our family. Will you forgive them?" Emma: "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting or enabling harmful behavior. I may forgive your parents someday, but I will never again put myself in a position where they can exploit my love for financial gain." "And us? Our relationship?" Emma: "Our relationship is the most important thing to come out of this entire situation. We're going to rebuild it based on truth, mutual respect, and genuine affection. You're going to discover that your grandmother isn't a confused, negative old woman. I'm someone who loves you fiercely and wants nothing more than to be part of your life in healthy, authentic ways." 6 months later, Emma and I had developed the kind of relationship I had always hoped for. She visited me regularly in Savannah. We had long phone conversations about her college experiences and future plans. And most importantly, we built trust, based on honesty rather than management and manipulation. Caroline and Marcus faced significant financial challenges after losing the trust fund income. They were forced to sell their historic Charleston house and move to a much smaller home. Marcus had to take a position with a larger firm rather than maintaining his boutique practice. Caroline returned to work full-time for the first time in years. The social status they had purchased with my money evaporated when they could no longer afford the charitable donations and luxury lifestyle that had made them prominent in Charleston society. But the most significant consequence was the damage to their relationship with Emma. My granddaughter was deeply hurt by the lies and manipulation she had discovered, and it took over a year for her to begin rebuilding trust with her parents. She insisted on family therapy and complete honesty about their financial situation and treatment of me as conditions for maintaining a relationship with them. As for me, I discovered something I hadn't expected. I was happier and more peaceful than I had been in years. Removing toxic people from my life, even when those people were family members I loved, had freed me to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial obligation. I used the money that had been going to Caroline and Marcus's trust fund to establish a foundation supporting elder abuse, prevention, and education. The foundation helps other elderly people recognize manipulation tactics and provides legal support for those who need to escape financial exploitation by family members. 1 year after Emma's wedding, I received a letter from Caroline asking if we could meet to discuss rebuilding our relationship. The letter acknowledged the harm she had caused and expressed genuine remorse for the lies and manipulation. She didn't ask for financial support or make excuses for her behavior. I agreed to meet with her, but with clear boundaries and realistic expectations. Forgiveness was possible, but trust would have to be rebuilt slowly through consistent actions rather than words. Most importantly, any future relationship would be based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. Looking back now, I realize that Emma's wedding was the best thing that could have happened to our family. The humiliating name tag that was meant to marginalize me instead became the catalyst for exposing years of manipulation and abuse. It forced truth into the open and created the opportunity for authentic relationships based on love rather than financial leverage. The absent old lady had indeed become very present, and in doing so, I had discovered that respect and love cannot be bought, but they can certainly be demanded. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family members is to stop enabling their harmful behavior and force them to face the consequences of their choices. At 70 years old, I finally learned that I deserved better than being treated as a source of funding rather than a person worthy of love and respect. And that lesson, painful as it was to learn, became the foundation for the most authentic and fulfilling relationships of my life. The trust fund was gone, but the trust that mattered most between Emma and me was stronger than it had ever been. And that was worth more than all the money in the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.